Kenny Mercer was 23 when people started calling him disciplined like it was the same thing as gifted. He never corrected them, but he knew the difference. Gifted was what people said about boys who moved well before anybody taught them how. Boys who could copy a combination after seeing it once, who seemed to understand timing without drilling it to death, who stayed loose under pressure because something in them had always belonged there. Disciplined was what they said when they watched you jog home from the gym because you couldn't afford taxis, when they saw you eating chicken and rice out of a dented plastic tub at 10:30 at night, when they noticed you never missed morning roadwork unless you were injured enough to limp. Discipline was respect with a ceiling on it. Kenny had built his whole life under that ceiling. He lived in a one-bedroom flat above a vape shop in Salford with walls thin enough to hear arguments through and a boiler that worked only when it felt like proving a point. He trained out of a proper gym, but not a glamorous one. The mats were old in places, the changing room smelled damp in winter, and the cage wall had one panel patched up with a repair job everyone trusted only because it had held so far. The head coach, Martin, had fought years ago at a decent domestic level and still carried himself like his body remembered every injury separately. Kenny loved the gym in the way some people love churches. Not because it made him feel peaceful. Because it made sense. You turned up. You worked. You got better or you found out exactly where you were lacking. His days had a shape to them that kept other thoughts away. Up before 6. Run if it was a roadwork day. Shift at a warehouse 3 mornings a week, loading and scanning returns for an online retailer. Back to the gym by noon. Wrestling on Mondays and Thursdays. Pads and sparring on Tuesdays. Strength work where he could fit it. Evening classes with the amateurs and newer lads because helping out knocked a bit off his membership and Martin said teaching basics showed you where your own were weak. There was nothing cinematic about it. He was tired a lot. Sometimes so tired he sat on the edge of his bed still in joggers and hand wraps and stared at the wall for 10 minutes before remembering to shower. He missed birthdays. He missed nights out. He kept telling his mum he'd come for dinner on Sunday and then showing up late because sparring had run over or his body felt too heavy to move. Still, when people asked if it was worth it, he always said yes. Because by 23, Kenny had done enough to prove he was more than just another gym lad talking big in gloves. 3 amateur titles. A solid start as a pro. A reputation for being hard to break, harder to outwork, and miserable to deal with if you gave him time to settle. He wasn't famous, not even close, but in the local scene people knew his name. Promoters liked him because he sold a few tickets and always came in shape. Coaches liked him because he listened. Other fighters respected him in that guarded way fighters do, where respect mostly means nobody thinks you're pretending. He had earned every inch of it. That mattered to him, maybe more than it should have. Because deep down, Kenny didn't just want to win fights. He wanted his way of getting there to mean something. He wanted the hours to count for more than natural flash. He wanted it to be true that if one man worked harder and stayed more honest about the grind, he would eventually beat the men who floated through on gifts. That belief had built him. Then he met Leon Varga. The first time Kenny saw him was on a Thursday afternoon in March, after wrestling, when Martin told everyone to stick around because a lad from another gym was coming in for rounds before a short-notice fight. Welterweight, Martin said. Good amateur. Calm down before you get ideas. The room gave the usual half-interested response. Every gym had stories about visitors who were supposed to be special. Most of them looked good on pads, then folded the moment a round got ugly. Leon didn't look like much when he came in. Tall, loose, not massively built. Dark hair tied back badly. Cheap gray hoodie. One battered duffel bag. If Kenny had passed him in town, he wouldn't have thought fighter. Maybe runner. Maybe one of those lads who played 5-a-side and somehow never looked tired. Then Leon started moving. Nothing dramatic. Just skipping first, then shadowboxing while he waited for raps to go on. Kenny felt himself watching in spite of himself. Leon was smooth in a way that irritated him straight away. Not showy. Not trying to impress. Just balanced. Every step under him, every feint connected to the next thing. No wasted tension anywhere. When Martin paired him up for pads with one of the other coaches, the room got a little quieter without admitting it. The sounds were wrong for ordinary work. Too clean. Too sharp. He wasn't throwing harder than everyone else. He was throwing easier. Kenny hated that he noticed. "Looks nice," said Dino, one of the pros from the gym. Kenny shrugged. "Pads." Dino smirked. "Yeah." When sparring started, Leon did 3 rounds with fresh partners rotating in. Kenny got the last one. He told himself not to rush in. Just touch him up, make him work, test the body, crowd him. The same things Martin always said when somebody looked pretty at range. It lasted about 40 seconds before Kenny realized this wasn't that. Leon wasn't trying to embarrass him. That was almost worse. He was just reading him. Jab, low kick. Slip the return. Step off. Touch the body. Feint level change. Make Kenny square up. Reset. Nothing heavy. Nothing wild. But Kenny felt half a beat behind everything. When he finally committed to a right hand, Leon was already gone and came back with a short left hook that clipped him on the temple just enough to annoy him. The round wasn't domination. Kenny landed. He got Leon to the fence once and dug a good knee into the thigh. But when the buzzer went, he knew exactly what had happened. He'd had to force every decent moment. Leon had found his without strain. Martin said nothing at first. He never did when he wanted you to sit with the truth a bit. Later, as they were unwrapping, Dino said, "He's fighting on the Northline card next month." Kenny nodded like he didn't care. Then 2 weeks later his own manager rang and said, "You want the co-main in June." Opponents changed. Good kid. Name's Leon Varga. Kenny said yes before hearing the rest. Of course he did. He'd have said yes if they offered him a bear in gloves. But privately, the name hit something ugly in him. It felt less like opportunity than a challenge to a belief he'd built his life on. Martin watched him hit pads that evening and said, "You trying to beat him or punish him?" Kenny spat to the side of the ring apron. "Both." Martin shook his head. "That's one of the wrong answers. Camp for the first fight went well, if you only counted effort." Kenny was in shape. Better shape than before, maybe the best of his life. He added extra road work, extra wrestling rounds, extra drilling on entries from the jab, extra cage control. He studied Leon's previous fights until he could hear the commentary in his sleep. Leon was real enough on tape, calm pressure when he wanted it, clean counters, strong balance, good feel for scrambles. But Kenny kept coming back to the same conclusion. He could drown him. Not if he fought emotional. Not if he chased. But if he kept a pace on him, made him defend, hit the body, forced clinches, dragged him into ugly transitions, made every exchange cost something, then talent would have to breathe like everybody else. The problem was that Kenny said all the right things out loud and the wrong ones in his head. Out loud, "He's sharp, but we've got him." In his head, "Let's see how gifted you are when you're tired." Out loud, "Respect him." In his head, "You've had it easy." It wasn't just envy. Envy came with a strange twin, arrogance. The more he thought about Leon's natural ease, the more Kenny started telling himself that his own work ethic made him morally better. Tougher. More deserving. It was a short step from there to believing the fight was supposed to go his way because he'd suffered more for it. That kind of thinking feels powerful right up until it doesn't. Fight week stripped him down as usual. Sleep got patchy. Water cut started. Every little comment grated on him. At media day, Leon was relaxed, answering questions without much drama. "How do you see the matchup?" a local interviewer asked. Leon smiled a little. "Hard fight. Kenny's strong, fit, puts a lot on you. I'll have to be switched on." Kenny hated how reasonable he sounded. He wanted a villain and got a man doing his job. Backstage on fight night, Martin wrapped his hands in silence for a while, then said, "You don't need to prove a point about life in there. Just win the fight in front of you." Kenny nodded. But once the cage shut, something in him still wanted more than that. The first round was close and ugly in places. Kenny came out hard behind the jab, chopped the calf, pushed Leon to the fence twice, landed some good knees. Leon stayed maddeningly composed. He gave ground where he wanted, framed well, found short counters when Kenny overextended. Midway through the round he timed a right hand down the middle that snapped Kenny's head back and made the crowd wake up. Kenny finished the round strong enough to convince himself he'd banked it. In the corner, Martin said, "Good. But stop loading up when he exits. Make him carry you, don't chase his head." Kenny heard him. He didn't quite listen. Round 2 was where the fight started slipping. Leon settled into the timing. He began meeting Kenny's entries with cleaner shots, turning him more often, punishing him for squaring up in the clinch. Kenny still worked, nobody could say he didn't work, but more of it looked like effort without return. He got a takedown with a minute left and the crowd roared, but Leon used the fence, built up, and escaped before Kenny did anything major. Back in the corner, breathing harder than he wanted, Kenny looked at Martin and saw concern around the edges. "You're making him comfortable because you're trying to win every second too hard," Martin said. "Settle down. He's reading your first move. Give him something to think about." Kenny swallowed and nodded. Then he went out for the third and fought like a man offended by the idea of losing. That was the worst thing he could have done. He pressed too much. His feet came together on exits. He winged a right hand in open space after Leon showed him a level change. Leon slipped outside, hit a left hook, then a right straight as Kenny tried to recover. Kenny didn't go out, but his legs gave enough for Leon to see it. A calm flurry followed, not wild, just accurate, and Kenny had to grab hold and clinch to stay safe. The crowd loved it because crowds love visible damage and momentum swings. Martin hated it. So did Kenny, because he knew by then the fight wasn't being taken from him by magic. He was losing it in ordinary ways, bad decisions, ego, impatience. He rallied late, as he always did, but not enough. Leon won the decision. Clear enough that Kenny couldn't really argue, close enough to be painful. When the scores were read, Kenny kept his face still. He shook Leon's hand because that's what you do when people are looking. Leon said something like, "Good fight, man," and Kenny nodded without hearing properly. Backstage, after the adrenaline drained, the shame set in. Not shame at losing by itself. He'd always known he'd lose eventually. Anybody in the sport with half a brain knows that. It was the shape of the loss that got him. He had come in believing hard work would give him a kind of right. Then met someone talented enough to punish every bit of ego hidden inside that belief. Martin let him sit with it for a while before talking. "What are you angry at?" he asked. Kenny peeled tape off his wrists too hard. "I made mistakes." "Yeah. I can beat him." "Maybe." Kenny looked up. Martin leaned against the wall. "But that's not what you're really angry at." Kenny said nothing. "You're angry because he found things you have to dig for. You're angry because you think that means something unfair happened." The words landed too cleanly. Kenny wanted to tell him to shut up. Instead he stared at the floor. Martin went on. "Plenty of lads work hard. Plenty of lads suffer. The sport doesn't owe them wins for it. It only asks whether what you've got is enough on the night." That stayed with Kenny because he hated it and knew it was true. For a month after the fight, he was bad company. He trained because he always trained, but something sour sat under everything. He watched clips back obsessively. Some nights he replayed the third round and thought, if I'd stepped left there, if I'd jabbed first there, if I'd listened properly in the corner. Other nights he went uglier than that and watched Leon's other fights, looking for proof that he was overrated, that someone else had exposed him, that the loss said less about Kenny than it felt like it did. It didn't help. Worse than the envy was the way arrogance lingered after losing. It changed form, but didn't leave. He caught himself dismissing training partners in his head. Thinking things like, "At least I'm not one of these lads with no ambition." Acting as if pain he had chosen gave him depth other people lacked. One night after sparring, he stayed behind to hit the bag long after everyone else had left. Not technical rounds either. Just angry noise. Martin eventually came over and took the bag with one hand to still it. "This isn't work," he said. Kenny breathed through his mouth and looked away. "This is you trying to beat the feeling out of yourself." Maybe it needs beating out. Martin folded his arms. No. It needs admitting. Kenny laughed once, bitterly. What, that I'm jealous of him? That'd be a start. The word sounded filthy out loud. But once it was spoken, other things came with it. Jealous that Leon looked free where Kenny looked burdened. Jealous that he could do things cleanly Kenny had to claw toward. Jealous that some men seemed born already halfway fluent in a language Kenny was still translating word by word. And underneath that, another truth, Kenny had made a personality out of suffering. He had started treating his own grind like proof of virtue. A few weeks later, Leon's name came up again when one of the lads said he'd seen him coaching kids at his gym on a Sunday after fighting the night before. Kenny almost dismissed it, then didn't. He asked around quietly. Heard Leon also worked part-time doing deliveries. Heard he'd had knee issues as an amateur and spent nearly a year rebuilding. Heard his dad had fought some, badly, and burned bridges at 2 gyms, so Leon trained with a chip under his comm after all. None of it made Kenny feel better, exactly. But it complicated the lazy version of the story he'd been telling himself. Talent hadn't saved Leon from work. It had just meant his work looked different. That was when the shift began. Not in one movie scene revelation. More in embarrassment, then honesty, then better habits. Kenny stopped watching Leon to resent him and started watching to learn. He saw details he'd ignored before because he was too busy being threatened by them. The way Leon hit his feet before angles. How little he reached on counters. How patient he was when the right opening wasn't there. He saw places he himself had been predictable, especially on resets and when emotions rose. He changed his training, not by doing more, but by doing it less stupidly. More deliberate sparring, fewer wars. More film study with a purpose. More rounds starting from bad positions. More work on defense after his first attack missed. Long sessions on feints, exits, and composure. Martin noticed before Kenny said anything. About time, he muttered one afternoon after a spar where Kenny had gone 3 rounds without once trying to force a finish that wasn't there. Kenny wiped sweat from his eyes. What? You're finally training to improve instead of training to prove. 9 months after the first fight, the rematch came together. Leon had won once since then. Kenny had beaten a stubborn wrestler on points in a fight that wasn't pretty but showed growth. Same promotion. Bigger card. This time main card, not co-main. The matchmakers sold it the obvious way, close first fight, unfinished business, 2 prospects moving toward the same space. People around Kenny talked as if revenge was automatic motivation. He knew better now. If he treated it like revenge, he'd lose again. Camp felt different from the first one. Hard, still. Hard enough that some mornings his legs ached before he even got out of bed. But cleaner mentally. He wasn't trying to erase the first loss. He was trying to become the man who could answer it properly. Martin saw that too. One night after pads he said, "You respect him yet?" Kenny nodded. Good. That's useful. Fear can be useful too, if you've got any honesty left. Kenny smiled despite himself. You always know how to build confidence. I'm not building confidence, Martin said. I'm trying to stop you lying to yourself before the cage shuts. Fight week the second time felt quieter inside him. Not calm, exactly. More like clear. At media day, Leon was much the same as before, relaxed, controlled, no nonsense. When they stood face to face for photos, Kenny didn't feel the old flare of irritation. He saw what was there, a very good fighter, a hard problem, a man with his own work behind him. The interviewer asked the usual question. What's changed since the first fight? Kenny answered before thinking too much. I've got better. And I've got over myself a bit. A few people laughed. Leon did too, just slightly. It was the most honest thing Kenny had said into a microphone in his life. Backstage before the rematch, Martin wrapped his hands and said, "Same rules as always. Breathe. See him. Don't argue with the fight." Kenny nodded. When the walkout came, the noise hit him differently than last time. Still loud, still electric, still enough to wake every nerve. But not personal anymore. He didn't need the crowd to confirm anything. He just needed 25 good minutes, or 15 if it ended early. Round 1 was tense and careful. Leon still had the cleaner eyes at range, but Kenny wasn't giving him the same easy reads. He showed the jab and didn't always commit. He exited on angles instead of lines. He kicked the body more and didn't chase every touch with a burst. Mid-round, Leon landed a sharp right hand that got a reaction from the crowd. Kenny answered with a clinch break elbow and a calf kick that checked some of Leon's rhythm. Back in the corner, Martin said, "Good. Boring is fine. Boring wins if it's honest." Kenny nearly laughed. Round 2 was the first time the fight tilted his way. He started touching the body consistently, making Leon's movement slightly more expensive. Not dramatic damage, just accumulation. He mixed level changes well enough that Leon couldn't sit as freely on counters. Twice he got him to the fence and this time didn't insist on forcing a takedown that wasn't there, he just worked, framed, hit, made him carry weight, and left on.